Welcome to Energy Unplugged, the go-to podcast focusing on the global energy transition. My name is Rob Pearce, and I'm a senior associate in the UK and Ireland advisory team here at Aurora. Today, I am joined by Kevin O'Donovan, who is managing director at UK and Ireland for Statkraft. Welcome, Kevin, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. I think it would be great to sort of give the listeners a quick sort of introduction to sort of what you do at Statkraft and sort of a brief background of how you reached this role.
So I'm the country manager for Statkraft in the UK and Ireland, and I sit in our European management team for our renewable business. So my focus is mainly on the day-to-day business of growing our renewable activities in UK and Ireland, and then the wider European brief means I'm involved in looking at quite a few of our different markets across Europe. I guess for me, it's been an interesting journey to ending up working with a 100% state-owned utility business. I've been developing renewables for around 24 years. Quite a lot of that has been onshore wind, and then as the technologies evolved, obviously working in solar. I have done some stuff with biomass, development of interconnectors, and then more recently as well in offshore wind. So quite a broad range of the renewable technologies, and I suppose I've very much gone from it being, let's say, an up-and-coming market or sector to now being what I would view as quite a mature sector. And I always make the joke that, when I attended the early conferences on our industry, it was a lot of people with maybe woolly jumpers and lots of high aspirations of saving the world. But the industry has definitely matured, and as we all know, if we attend the industry conference now, it's a lot of people in suits and a lot of very serious-looking people. So I still try and keep that early stage kind of development / entrepreneurial mindset when I look at the business today. But obviously it's matured a lot, and it's been an exciting journey, I have to say, and really exciting to see how far the renewable industry has come, and really exciting about seeing just the direction that it has to go, even though it may be quite daunting and challenging at other times.
Yeah, it sounds like you're sort of in a great position to tell us sort of where we are today and sort of looking forward with all that experience in this sector. So I think sort of starting off with GB, sort of as one of those sort of key focuses of yours, what would you say the landscape is like right now for renewable developers in the UK?
I think from a national policy and overall macro policy perspective, I think we're in a relatively good place. If I compare it to 20 years ago, it's definitely a lot clearer and far more ambitious. And also as well, I think we have to give credit to the policymakers. They are, in my view, now very committed to delivering on the policies that are there. So from that perspective, it's a positive picture. And that's quite common, I would say, or the same situation across all the European markets now. The governments and the EU are all very committed to go down this journey of achieving net zero in a policy perspective. But the challenge is, and this is the challenge as much in the UK as any other market, is the implementation of that policy, making this happen. And we're trying to do a generational change. This is a huge transition, as we all know, from the fossil fuel-based industry that we had to running on renewables and eventually achieving net zero. And that is not going to be easy. So I think if you spend a little bit of time talking with developers in the UK, they'll probably point to a lot of the challenges around the grid, the bottlenecks that are there, the link to the timeline for the planning process, and some of the uncertainties that are there maybe still in some aspects on the regulatory side. So every now and again, I think it's good to step back and take that real big picture and say, well, it is positive but challenging. And that's my kind of summary of where I see it from a development perspective in the UK and that wider European market.
Yeah, so obviously we've come a long way, and sometimes that can get lost. Do you think we've done sort of the easier sections in terms of transforming our sort of grid towards renewables, or do you reckon sort of the easier bits are to come and we've kind of got over the major hurdles in terms of getting people on board with that transition?
Um, I think it's been challenging to get here, and it's going to be challenging to get to where we want to. Um, nothing comes easy. I think some of the most successful sports people in the world who've dominated their sports work harder than anyone else, and they have to do that every time. And it seems, kind of looking back, that they won all these events and tournaments and dominated their sport. It must have been easy for them, but it wasn't. It was damn hard every day, and I think that's what we need in the renewables industry to have as our mindset as well. This isn't going to be easy, but it wasn't easy in the past, and I think that's where having this strong interest and commitment in what we're ultimately trying to achieve is really important, and that's something I think is really important in organizations. And luckily enough, in Statkraft, I think we're the largest producer of renewable energy in Europe already. We have a really strong markets unit working across Europe and across our global activities. And we as a company are all believing that we're on this mission, and our tagline is to renew the way the world is powered. And I think you need that to help you get through the challenges, and to be able to get that longer vision of, okay, we have these challenges, but we can get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important to sort of keep that positive mindset, and that it will all be worth it, even on the tougher days. Yeah. I guess obviously speaking in terms of sort of GB specifically for a moment, recently in the last sort of couple of months, we've had sort of a change of governing party here in GB, and there's been a lot of talk about sort of Labour energy policy. It was a big part of their electoral campaign. Have sort of these recent changes, sort of the few things they've done since they've got into power, sort of shifted the dial for renewables sort of developers in particular in the UK? Or is this sort of looking like more of a longer term process, and we'll only really be able to work out how successful it is in a few years down the road?
Whatever government is there, previous government, current government, I think there was strong commitment on that overall long-term net zero target. And I've seen this in other European countries. The other country have direct responsibility. In Ireland, a very strong commitment in the Irish government, with the Green Minister Eamon Ryan there as well. And I think what I see is that strong commitment is really important. But I think what's positive so far to see with the new government is also an understanding now, I think, and this is part because it's a new government, but part because I think all of us are learning that the policy was the big focus and important aspect over the let's say the last 4 or 5 years, but actually it's the implementation is now the challenge. And that I think this current government are making positive noises, I think, around being quite focused on that they have already done some immediately positive things that hopefully will lead to us being able to progress forward faster than we have today. But as I say, I've seen other countries as well where strong government commitment and strong ministers or secretary of states showing leadership of what needs to be done. But even with that, it still doesn't necessarily mean things are changed overnight. So, lifting of the ban on onshore wind in England, and committing to more resources in the planning authorities, and generally trying to look at reforming planning policy are all really, really good first steps. But that's first steps, and there is a long way to go. But I don't doubt the commitment that's there from the new government, and I think that's vital. But long journey ahead of all of us to actually implement that really positive noises that we've heard so far.
Yeah, so I think you've touched there on a few things that sort of the policy direction is very much going in sort of the right direction in terms of renewables and sort of the energy transition, but the implementation is the tough bit here. So planning being one of those components, which I think is probably a problem across many, many different countries. Are there any other sort of different aspects of implementation which are proving a challenge?
Yeah, and again, this comment is kind of born out of being in the sector for a very long time. One of the things that I've learned over that my time working in the sector has been unintended consequences are the things that can really bite you. So I think, we need to be careful of trying to completely reform different aspects of let's say where we see issues in developing renewables and generally moving towards a net zero system, because I've seen before where very strong policymakers or new governments have come in and tried to set up new government departments or try and create other kind of fast track solutions, and a lot of the time it ends up just being another step in the process that you already had to do beforehand. So for me, I think the focus on implementation is far more important than the one request I have for any policymakers or politicians that I meet is it's a resources commitment that we need. And that's resources in terms of putting people into local authorities, into the system operator, into the other aspects, the regulator, any of those different government bodies, putting the resources in there and then putting the financial commitment behind those to actually be able to let them implement the policy, and putting that strong then political support in public behind explaining why we need to do this and why we need to go in that direction. That's where the focus needs to be, rather than maybe trying to do major market or regulatory changes or to create new units or divisions to move things along.
Is that then potentially sort of something that GB Energy could potentially be at fault at then, given that we have lots of sort of successful renewable support schemes for existing technologies? Obviously, there's quite a lot of unknowns as to what exactly that will do, but Labour sort of put this big flagship policy that could potentially interfere with other successful kind of schemes that are already in place.
In fairness, I don't think that's what has been said about GB Energy so far by the government, and I think it's still at an early stage and we'll learn as it evolves. But I have heard members of the party talk about their focus on this mission control and delivering the kind of the near-term solutions and so forth. And I think when they talk about GB Energy, it seems to be more around the lines of supporting the market, and maybe supporting the market in maybe some of those more difficult areas where support could actually be quite good. And I've seen in other countries state involvement, state development, and I think it can work, and it won't necessarily slow down anything on the overall industry side. So I would see that as being a little bit different. I think that's more something that's there to try and enable growth in a faster pace, and that appears to be what the government is saying their intention is. So I think that's positive. And I go back to where the key focus is around addressing the grid constraints, putting in the resources in the planning system, and generally as well. And I think this is a big thing that we in the renewable industry actually overlooked for a long time as well. I think we need to really communicate over and over and over again why we're doing this, why it's actually an opportunity rather than this terrible burden we have to put on ourselves. The UK and all the European countries have this brilliant opportunity to create energy security, have long-term price stability for their electricity for the consumers, as well as being able to tackle climate change and reduce down our emissions and making our countries more secure. So we really need to communicate that more. And I really was at fault at that for the first 15 years of my career. I'm developing renewable resources. What more do I have to do to explain myself? We're saving the world. And and it's very clear to me now that frankly, that's a very insular, industry-specific view. And we cannot communicate often enough the importance of what we're doing and the opportunity it creates for us in the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. It's not just about climate change, although that's obviously a huge factor within this. There are many, many other opportunities outside of that, which kind of potentially outside of industry, outside of that little bubble, people are more interested in certain aspects of that. And I think you touched on there sort of how different sort of picture across Europe, and that's something that you have a view on. So how state involvement sort of push renewables on in different places. But I think it would be useful just to put in context sort of where does GB fit within the European picture in terms of its sort of place, its progress along the journey to the energy transition. And also in terms of these sort of implementation barriers, is that still the key thing that's holding us back sort of across Europe, or are there different factors in different places?
So in terms of GB's place in Europe, and a little bit similar in Ireland, I think, there are two island grid electrical systems. So as the level of intermittent renewables increases of the overall electricity generation mix in the country, it's going to meet more challenges earlier than the, let's say, more continental system where it's a larger grid network and it is more interconnected. So if you look at it in that context and you look at the amount of renewables that are already on the system in GB in Ireland, it's really impressive. It shows that already in this decade, how far we've moved. And frankly, probably in 2000, if we painted a picture of where we are today, we probably would have struggled to believe we would have achieved that. A little bit like maybe sometimes people look at where we are now and see where we want to get to with a net zero system or a very high renewables-based system with very low carbon intensity. People see that as a really maybe overambitious challenge or target, but I believe we can get there, and I think we need that big picture approach on it. And so for GB, we have a very good situation in terms of the progress that's been made so far, but still obviously a long journey to go. And I think that the challenges because of the island grid system are also almost like opportunities in a way too, because Statkraft has already actually been quite involved in working and dealing with that challenge through our grid stability projects. We built the first rotating stabilizer project to provide inertia onto the grid system in the UK, up in Keat in Scotland, and have 5 of those projects either in operation or construction at this stage, and have quite a lot of development underway with battery storage, as well as our activities around matching the market there through our markets team, with linking the demand for renewable power with generation. So we very much see ourselves as this system integrator, and in markets like GB, we're having to deal with all those challenges first. And what we're seeing now is that other European countries are actually only getting to that stage now. And for companies like Statkraft, it means that we're able to deploy some of that learning in other countries. So there's a lot of opportunities for the businesses and companies working in those more challenging parts of decarbonizing the grid system, taking this knowledge and expertise we're learning at the moment in the UK and taking it to other European countries. And for someone like Statkraft, it's really very interesting to see all our different teams in the different parts of the European countries collaborating. And for example, my colleagues in Italy right now are very, very busy looking at how to progress their storage projects and facilities, and we're able to share a lot of knowledge with what we've done in UK and Ireland with them, and I see that happening a lot. So I see the other countries in Europe coming up against the similar challenges that we're seeing maybe a little bit earlier in UK and Ireland.
Thanks, Simon. So I think you've touched on there the fact that sort of GB and Ireland sort of hit some of the challenges with sort of integrating renewables onto the grid quite early. Having sort of seen those kind of challenges occur in GB and being part of the solution to those as part of Statkraft, what kind of lessons would you take over to sort of deploy to sort of give to other European countries who are sort of getting to that similar point in their journey now?
Yeah. What has been really key is that the specific support has been put there to enable the technology to be developed. So, this is relatively new concept to develop these machines, even though they kind of technically they've been used in different ways around the world, but to actually build a machine to provide inertia in the grid is something that would have been very difficult to do if we didn't have the Pathfinder scheme, which basically gave us certainty on revenue for a sufficient period of time that we could make the investment decision and put build the project and put the technology into place. So that support is really important, and I think that's a lesson for other countries. But it's also even for what we're trying to do in the UK and Irish markets around long duration energy storage, because at the moment that is challenging to make an investment decision on a merchant basis or on a kind of a non-support basis at the moment. So those supports are really important, and Statkraft are very focused in the different markets on looking at those longer term solutions, whether it be like, for example, we have a pumped hydro project in Scotland, the Loch project, which we believe will make a really significant difference to the bottleneck we have of a large amount of onshore wind that's produced in Scotland at the moment, that on some of our operating wind we're frustratingly we're constrained and that power isn't used. And we believe that through the LDES support mechanism, which the DEC are currently working on the consultation process with, that type of support will enable us to make investment decisions on projects like Loch and that can provide longer duration storage, 8-10 hour storage at 400 or 500 megawatts of capacity, to help utilize more and more of that renewable generation. And that we see that support being important as well with other longer duration technologies, which aren't maybe as mature as the 2 to 4 hour storage technologies at the moment. So I think that's really important, that policymakers and governments realize that yes, we have to support it for a period of time, but that enables that really important technology and assets to be put on the system. And the overall cost-benefit analysis for having these on the system actually far outweighs whatever theoretical subsidy or support that has to be given. I mean, my experience in the past, I was involved in the development of the Greenlink interconnector between Ireland and UK, and that was a cap and floor support mechanism, and that was vital to enable the rollout of not just that project but other interconnector projects. And we're seeing that those projects are now being built or even in operation already, and that they're able to operate pretty much on a standalone basis. But the cap and floor support was what enabled that investment decision to be made. So I think that's really important as a lesson to be taken in our journey so far, and it applies for what we need to do in GB into the future with the newer technologies and into the other European countries.
So I think it's sort of understandable that maybe the renewable support schemes came first in this transition, but would you say it's potentially sort of not enough attention was paid to sort of the other enabling technologies, sort of the other sort of enabling features of the grid that needed to sort of come along with that transition? And would you say it's sort of something that you'd look back and change and say, well, let's try and put this support scheme in place earlier? Because for a pumped hydro project, for example, even if we were to get that sort of support in place now, it's going to take a number of years to get that online. And that's going to struggle to sort of be helping us too much for sort of the ambitious net zero targets we have.
Look, hindsight is a terrible thing. But I think it's more about looking forward now and saying we know that the right supports for the technologies that are coming now are going to enable them to be delivered. And there is probably, maybe the economists may want to have a discussion around the timing of this and how mature the technology is, and when do you introduce that support relative to the maturity of the technology. But I think, in fairness, the what we've seen with the UK supports it, as you say, it supported the renewables, particularly onshore renewables, whether it be onshore wind initially, and then solar, and then obviously a really strong commitment on the offshore. And now we're seeing that that there is this move towards supporting LDES technologies, and also on the hydrogen side, which is another important part of Statkraft's activities in the UK, with the HAR1 and now HAR2 process or auction coming up shortly. That's all really important, and I think there is a discussion to be had that if the economists, or maybe the Treasury, want to go in and have a discussion and say, well, where's our value for money, and the technology isn't mature enough right now? Well, actually, there's a very strong argument based on the evidence we've seen that if you support that technology at that earlier stage, then you give it far better chance of delivering in your country. And also, it means that you give it a far better chance that your country will develop an industry around that, and actually could be something that they can be successful internationally with, not just in the country itself. I think that's a very important aspect of where we are right now, is that the countries who support the technologies as they come on will be the ones, I believe, who will benefit most in the long term, even though there may be a slightly higher economic cost at the start.
It feels like that might be particularly the case with sort of hydrogen as an emerging technology in terms of energy markets coming forward, where obviously there are lots of auctions going on around the world, but also there's focused in sort of Europe, and obviously there's HAR1 auctions, HAR2 auctions you've touched on in GB. Maybe that's sort of where a lesson from the past can be learned a bit, to sort of put that in place early, even if the technology is not sort of fully mature right now. Bringing it online could have sort of really big benefits down the road. Another flexible technology is obviously batteries, which I think Statkraft are involved in quite a bit as well. Obviously quite successful in GB in terms of bringing those online sort of through sort of dedicated markets and the capacity market. They've had a little bit of a rockier time over some recent months, recent years. Is there anything you think that sort of is maybe being undervalued in the market of how these can contribute to the grid going forward, and sort of what can we do to make sure that they have a place and keep expanding on the grid in future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're right to highlight that it's something that everyone's maybe looking a little bit closer on at the moment. But I think one of the things that I think we have to be careful of, and this even goes back to the discussion around hydrogen or floating offshore wind and batteries, is that industry needs to be careful that it doesn't over-promise or get too optimistic in saying what it can deliver with those technologies. And I think that's an area we need to be quite careful on, because there probably has been a little bit of maybe assuming that the learning curve for these technologies would come through faster than it actually has. And I think that's something we have to be very careful of when we talk about any of these technologies, because the situation that arises then is that the support will be maybe more limited because the budget that's allocated for it, or even maybe the policymakers see the deployment of a large amount of a particular technology and think, well, that doesn't need any support. There's nothing wrong there. So I think when it comes to BESS or floating offshore wind or hydrogen, I think there's a more nuanced kind of view has to be there from the collective in terms of what do we need to make it happen, and be realistic about what that cost and implications will be, with still that longer term view of the cost benefit of this analysis in the long term will makes it a very compelling thing to do. So whether it be the BESS or hydrogen or floating offshore wind, I think that's something we need everyone in the industry to be quite mature and pragmatic and level-headed about in terms of projecting what growth can be achieved.
Yeah, so kind of a more sort of nuanced, complex picture than sort of it might initially be obvious with those technologies. But I think they all kind of have a place in the mix going forward. It probably means that we need all the help we can get to sort of complete the energy transition as fast as we would like to.
Absolutely, and I think that's why I guess we're in an interesting and very positive and exciting situation with Statkraft as a company. We're working across all those technologies in the market, and our belief is that you need some of all of them. There's no individual technology that's going to maybe just come in and save the day on its own. We need all, whether that be onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, batteries, grid stability projects, hydrogen, some really innovative ways of trading the power and operating the market. We need all of that.
Yeah, a very sort of complex but exciting picture to work in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think you touched on one final thing there, which I'd like to chat about, which is sort of the ways of trading power and sort of potentially the influence that PPAs have going forward, sort of as we roll off the support schemes that have brought a lot of the renewables online. So I think sort of quickly, how do you see this kind of space evolving? And I think more and more sort of talk has come around in terms of sort of 24/7 matching of PPAs to sort of give sort of true green energy, particularly with sort of their relationship to certain large technology companies. Is that kind of an evolution that you're seeing now, or is that something you think might come in future?
Well, I think we're seeing it now. Statkraft's own markets team, they've already facilitated over 4 gigawatts of renewable generation. And that's, the product is evolving. I can see now our own team with their trading capabilities, and they're particularly focused on flex generation. They're able to use their Unity platform to provide route to market solutions for grid scale batteries, gas engines, to stabilize the grid performance. So as well as our assets, and more we're seeing with our assets that it's not necessarily just CFDs. PPAs from large energy consumers is something we see as a very important part of the market going into the future. A lot of companies, whether they be the technology companies or other large energy consumers, have made very strong commitments in procuring their energy needs in a sustainable and green manner. And from my interactions with those type of consumers, they're serious about this, and they want to procure it at the best price they can and the best terms. But they're also very much willing to walk the walk and say, yes, we recognize the cost of the renewable power, but we want to meet our commitments, and we actually see opportunities and growth by us being able to do it that way. So whether it be our own assets that we develop and do direct PPAs with, or our markets trading division, where, as I say, they're providing a lot of route to market for not just the power generation, but also for storage and flexibility. And then going forward into the future, where there's more and more innovation required between the assets and a combination of assets and the markets trading piece, to be able to give that more steady generation profile to match what the customers and the consumers out there want. And I think that innovation is happening right now through companies like Statkraft, but obviously I think it's across the market.
I think that's really interesting to hear that. Yeah, so it's not just the generation side, but it's the full package around that that's really making the change happen. And I think we're coming towards the end of our time. I think it would just be nice to finish on sort of a positive note for the future, because obviously quite often we end up sort of in these discussions talking a lot about the challenges of where we've been and sort of what's difficult right now. But is there sort of a positive outlook that you have on the future?
Well, I think I touched on the start that you need that positive outlook to be able to keep going, and day to day it can be challenging sometimes. But one interesting way I like to look at it is that, every megawatt hour of new renewable energy we get onto the system is getting closer to where we want to get to, and makes a difference because it improves that energy security in the country. It gives us more price stability into the future, and it reduces our emissions in trying to tackle climate change. So bit by bit, every megawatt hour by megawatt hour that we achieve, we should be very proud of in the sector, and we should see that as been confirmation that we need to keep going, even when maybe some of the bigger challenges make it feel like it's a tough journey ahead.
That's a great outlook to have there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Rob. That was great. Thank you.
That was Rob Pearce, Senior Associate in Aurora's UK and Ireland team, talking to Kevin O'Donovan, Statkraft's Managing Director of UK and Ireland. Thanks for listening to Energy Unplugged. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to follow or subscribe to the podcast via whatever platform you use.